What does loving your neighbor actually look like? This is Journey with Care, where curious Canadians get inspired to love others well through real-life stories and honest conversations. Welcome back to another episode of Journey with Care. I'm here with my co-host, Wendi.
Hey there.
We're in the midst of our series, Differently Wired Together for Community, and we have a special guest on with us who we will introduce shortly. But before I do that, I want to remind you that we have our other podcast called Journey with Prayer, which is actually a podcast corresponding to each episode of this podcast, Journey with Care. You can find it on your favorite podcast player. Go to our website if you want to get it a few days early, but it's basically a prayer journey that takes you through what we talked about here to go from the head to the heart. So, Wendi, you want to recap where we're at in our series and maybe give a short introduction for our guest?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been going through a series, Differently Wired Together in Community, and I'm excited to continue that series today. In Differently Wired, we're referring to all kinds of neurodiversities and mental health concerns and different exceptionalities that are all around us in our communities, in our churches, and how do we care? How do we walk together better together? And with us today, we have Dr. Kelly Friesen joining us in the studio. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It is so good to be here with you. And we go back a little ways, back to our time in Altona. But for everybody else, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you into this series?
Yeah. I think it's always a bit difficult to talk about yourself. I'd much rather preach and teach than do that, but I'll do my best here. So I currently live in the Manitoba Prairies with my husband and my daughter. And for those cat lovers out there, our elderly Maine Coon cat. I'm an ordained minister, certified coach. I have a Master of Theology and a Doctor of Ministry where I concentrated on neurodiversity in the church. And my background is church leadership, pastoring, ministry training, and I've served thousands of individuals, both neurotypical and neurodivergent, one-to-one through inner healing, deliverance, spiritual guidance, coaching, and consulting over the years. And currently my focus is to help people fulfill their purpose through my Aligned with Purpose program and also consulting. And I'm expanding my doctoral work on neurodiversity and the church's response, hoping to advance healthier approaches, equality, equity, dignity for all neurotypes in the church.
So you've been studying a lot about neuroscience. You become a neuroscience coach and consultant. Can you share a bit of your journey towards that and how you became a neuroscience coach and consultant?
Yeah, I've been coaching and consulting in various capacities over the years. And like many, I'm a lifelong learner. So I enjoy learning new skills, that can help my clients. Neuroscience is an interesting field, as we all know, and it continues to confirm the Word of God. And, when we can utilize the findings of neuroscience and look at it through that Word, it can be a very powerful tool for us, both personally and professionally. And so that's why I got into study deeper into the areas of neuroscience. And as part of the coaching that I now offer my clients, as well as some of the programs that I have.
So when we're talking about neuroscience, can you define that, unpack that a little bit for me? What does neuroscience mean?
My training in neuroscience is specifically in the areas of coaching and leadership. And so it's to really help people at a very natural kind of way. So helping you to understand your brain, helping you to be the CEO of your brain, helping you to understand, why you might do things the way you do and why your brain is kind of feeling stuck and how to get past some of those things. So that's the aspect of neuroscience that I've studied, as opposed to, those who are like, a brain surgeon would study different aspects of it.
Right. No, I love that. And I love that you are dovetailing that with your background in pastoral ministry and theology. And you've referenced it before, how sort of like science catches up with God, like you're understanding how God created the brain and how we are wired to think, and you're able to journey with others. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that neuroscience we obviously as Christians, we do have to be choosy, maybe is the right word, in the direction that we go with it. to ensure that we are looking at it through the eyes of the Word of God. And anytime, there is, whether it's neuroscience or anything out there, there's going to be parallels with the Word of God. It all started with the Word. It all started with creation of how God created things. And, we kind of go from there. And so there's always going to be truths in it. And we can grab a hold of those things. And so often the neuroscience studies have just been proving what the Word of God already tells us, but gives us tools and another aspect of how we can dig in deeper.
So you've been coaching many, many people, and I imagine that you've encountered so many different kinds of people in that. So over the past 20 years in church leadership, has that influenced your work in working with neurotypical and neurodivergent individuals? Has that informed how you are bringing that into your coaching practice?
Yeah, I think so. It is an innate part of me to look at each person individually, not assume that one person is like the next person, regardless of whether they're neurotypical or neurodivergent. And so I think that's a really important view to have, because the minority of society would be neurodivergent, probably about 20%. That percentage changes all the time. But, obviously the amount of neurodivergent people as opposed to neurotypical people that I've met one-on-one will be less. However, there are a lot, and I have a lot of it's been such an honor to meet like all neurotypes through one-to-one, in whatever capacity that it's been. And I've been able to see the pain that's been caused. A lot of people that have come to me over the years, they're not necessarily all from people that I would have pastored, but coming from different denominations, different places. So they come with all kinds of different pains, different hurts. And yeah, the neurodivergent people that have come to me, there has been a lot of trauma and pain, a lot of times how they've been treated in society. And that has followed into the church. And my doctoral studies, I specifically dove into how society has influenced or treated neurodivergent people. Has that followed into the church? And through the studies, it was phenomenal how many neurodivergent people were willing to share their stories with me. Just in my research alone for my doctorate, they were so thankful that somebody was digging into this, because it is really, really needed. And there isn't a lot of information out there for the church specifically on this topic. So that is partly why I've gotten into it. One of the major reasons that I specifically have been zoning in on the topic of neurodiversity in the church is just because, honestly, God got a hold of me on it, spoke really clearly and deeply to me. That's a bit of a longer story, about 5 years ago. And so I felt really prompted to go down this direction, do my doctorate in this area and my studies, and expand this research and create, a certificate training programs to help the church body. When I say it like that, I mean the church as in the church leaders, those kinds of things, the body of the church, but also Christians as a whole, of how we can be equipped to join together in equality in this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And coming from a family, I have neurodiversity in my own home, and it's all around me. I'm surprised that it would be 20% because I see it like 50-50 Apple and Android often, because it's just so apparent to me. And a lot of the times undiagnosed or misunderstood. But that's helpful to hear your perspective. And I wonder, though, if the church is catching up with society in some of their awareness of neurodiversity that has a place in their theology, in how they treat each other in the church, because it isn't often spoken of in the church in an acceptable way. So you've talked about equality and equity, dignity for all neurotypes within the church. What are some of the key findings that you found there in that research?
I think there's multiple aspects to this, not only, the practical and the spiritual aspects of it, but I think it begins with our heart posture and the church's willingness to listen, the church's willingness to, and when I say the church, I'm not coming against the church. I love the church.
We do too, but we've got to have the honest, straight talk here. So
we got to say the tough things sometimes.
Yeah, because we love her.
Yeah, and I think because of my background, maybe it's one of the reasons why God's asked me to do this is because I do have, I come from a perspective of pastoring. I come from a perspective of training, of one-on-one ministry, of coaching, consulting in all these areas for so many years. And so I've been able to hear these stories. And so I think that willingness to stop and listen to the stories is the beginning. The willingness to have the conversations, the willingness to heal ourselves with our own biases, our willingness to do those checks on those internal beliefs and biases that not only, I think we don't always realize, well, I know we don't always realize those inner beliefs that not only stop us from living out our own purpose, but they also, we project those things to groups of people or individuals without even realizing it sometimes. And so that takes time and grace on ourselves, on each other, to walk through those, to evaluate those things, and to know that we're going to make mistakes in the languages we choose, in as we're learning, as we're growing in this.
Well, I think that's so important what you're saying here. We do have blind spots, and not to hit ourselves over the head and say, oh no, I have to be perfect. I don't want to mess up in interacting with other people that are different from myself, but just humbly realizing that you and I and everybody around us, we all have blind spots. And in community, as we walk in community and build a level of trust, we can go there into those places and learn and be curious and accept other people to teach to us what it is that we need to know, instead of needing to feel like we have to have it all together. And I feel that would give the church a little bit of an exhale if we didn't have to have the right polished theological answer for every neurodiversity out there, but just say, you know what, we want to learn, we want to sit with, we want to be with. And you were doing that in your studies. You were saying you were reaching out to different people with neurodiversities and their willingness to talk. It's not in the right approach and humility. There is an eagerness to share stories. I'm just curious on that note, when you were talking to a variety of different people, were there common threads that you heard in your research from these people that were sharing their story? Were there certain things and elements that they had in common through your discussions?
Absolutely. In a matter of about 2 weeks, I received 78 questionnaires back. And the representation was honestly phenomenal. It was representing 10 countries, 20 denominations, ages 10 to over 65. There were at least 25 varying neurodivergent traits within the people that got back to me. So that it was just incredible. And while there were some people who had good experiences in the church, the majority of them did not. And that boiled down to multiple different aspects. I had asked a lot of questions and to understand different areas. So, for example, what is their experience in the sensory area, or their experience relationally, or their experience with faith, or just all kinds of things. But there was honestly a lot of trauma, and a lot of the stories that they told me were, they brought me to tears. It's a whole group of people that are really just calling out to be heard, to be loved, to be understood, to be accepted. And we need to do our part. So some of the common things that they told me, unfortunately, and many of them were abused within the church in multiple ways. And that, unfortunately, was a very common thread.
Mm.
And the fact that they would share that with me, most of these people I didn't know, was phenomenal.
Mm.
They want to see change. And some of them were sharing because of anger. Others were sharing because they want to be in the church. I think the fact that so many neurodivergent people are very trusting they believe the best in people. And so I think sometimes they found that they were taken advantage of, or their gifts were exploited, or the different things like that. But there was also a huge range of people, neurodivergent people who were professionals, some of them employed in the church. So many of them had been volunteering in the church, and they come from all walks of life, from doctors and nurses, educators, artists, professional students,
Mhm.
which is amazing to me that they were saying, yes, let's do this, let's make change, right? But a lot of things that they talked about were sensory was really tough for them, like walking into the church and there would be a lot of smells in the church, or there'd be a lot of, the media department, for example, there's a lot of crackling going on, and that was really tough for them. Or the lights are flickering, or, all kinds of things. These things everybody appreciates when they are, perfected to some degree. But many neurodivergent people, when those things are difficult, they can't actually participate.
Right.
Like, it actually stops them from hearing the sermon or engaging. It's exhausting for them.
Well, it would be no different than passing out peanut butter at communion for a lot of anaphylactics. Like, it's just not compatible. And I think for myself as a neurotypical, I understand it to the level that I walk with people in it. But I think a lot of in the neurotypical kind of standard society, they think, well, you just got to toughen up and get through it and stuff. But these are real deterrents.
It's like taking somebody's glasses and saying, like, see, but you can't.
Yeah.
Like, you just can't.
I'm happy to hear that you are uncovering these stories and giving a safe place. And yet also, obviously, we're all saddened to hear some of the reflections that have come back, some honest reflections of their experience within the church. And of course, we love the church and we want to see her thrive and we want it to be an inclusive place. But I think there's a huge blind spot there when we're talking about abuse, and it could be a variety of things. Each person has their own experience. But give me some examples of what does that look like? And is the church doing it in intentionality or out of a blind spot that these oppressive power plays are happening in the abuse dynamics?
Going back to the research, actually, I also offered questionnaires to church leaders,
Okay.
pastors and church leaders. I wanted their feedback. I felt it was important to hear their perspective. And in that 2-week span, I received about 10 back. Given more time, I probably would have gotten more, but it was right across the board as far as some not knowing what the terms were. This was new terminology altogether. I began the questionnaires with the terms that I'd be using throughout so that they'd really understand that. But some did not know what they were at all. Others were not aware of who in their community might be neurodivergent. And then there were others who, specifically, I remember one that they ran a home church and they felt like they had an advantage because they were able to really be involved with the families, get to know them, their lives, those kinds of things. I think one of the things that we need to understand is that neurodiversity is making the atmosphere good for all neurotypes. That doesn't always mean that we're going to know who in the community is neurodivergent. We shouldn't have to ask them. They can offer if they want to, because it is a private thing. It's up to every individual to share what they want to share and what they don't want to share. So when we can come into the church and we can create an atmosphere that is conducive to all neurotypes, now we're not singling anybody out, right? So for example, we can create a quiet room and we can have a speaker in there to hear the message that's not crackly, not too loud. And we can have a note on the door and we can say, this is a quiet room, no talking, please, and this room should be separate from the nursery. It shouldn't be the same. And anyone can use it. All neurotypes, anyone who feels they want to use it. We can have earplugs in the sanctuary that anybody can use, because even neurotypicals may find the music too loud. Give them earplugs, have them free, just take them if you need them. Nobody is, singled out that way. So it's all inclusive, and we can make improvements on sound levels. We can make improvements on lights. And this isn't always going to be easy in the way of, you have a big church, you've spent lots of money into it, or you have a small church, you don't have the teams or you don't have the finances to do those things. But everything that we do, every step forward we make is a good step forward. So these things don't cost anything. I mean, earplugs do, but not in the long run, not very much, but just have them available. There's so many things that we can do that at first will not cost a lot. And most churches will have at least one room that they can have a quiet room in, right? And if they don't, they can get there.
Yeah.
There's ways we can get there. It's important even spiritually to understand what language we're using. A lot of neurodivergent people don't want a cure. They don't want to be fixed. And when over the pulpit, it's called out that this and this neurodivergent trait should be healed, that person feels like, okay, I'm not welcome here. And you're not valuing who I am, because they value who they are.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but I'm just saying some people do. So the language we use is really, really, really important. Being understanding that a lot of neurodivergent people in these questionnaires, actually, they didn't like a lot of the touch things that go on in church. So, some of the like turn around and hug your neighbor, right? That'll throw a lot of people off for the entire rest of the morning. When we want to pray for someone, it doesn't matter the neurotype. We need to be respectful.
Mm-hmm.
Can I put my hand on your shoulder while I pray for you?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter which neurotype it is, but it's just respecting somebody's personal space. And that should be a general thing that we as a community just want to embrace, regardless of who's there. So some of these things I think we can naturally adopt, and it will trickle into the whole community as respect and be more welcoming for everybody.
Right.
Obviously, I go deeper into a lot of these things in my training program, and dive into those things. But I think that there's just simple things we can choose to do.
And what I'm hearing from you is being in a posture of listening, right? Like there's not a do this, this, and this is the recipe for an inclusive congregation. It's paying attention to the people around you and being responsive to that, probably creating that felt safety so that they can respond to what they actually need. I feel sometimes we're not creating the safety to even voice those things because they're trying hard to mask and to fit in order to be present. I'm wondering, I'm just hearing like fictitiously here, but Aunt Agnes in the background and Grandpa Bill in the front pew, and maybe a rigid Reynolds in the middle pew saying, but back in my day, or why can't we just like pull it up by the bootstraps and just get over it? We used to never have to do all these things. We didn't have to have these. We just like push through it, like just love Jesus and get through it. How would you respond to that? You're laughing because these things happen, but why are we so, maybe some would say, hypersensitive to all these sensitivities? Are we being too sensitive, or is there something more here?
Yeah. There's a multiple things to this. I think that, way back when, even when I was growing up, things were not discussed. Things were not talked about. It didn't matter. If anything didn't seem like the norm or the typical, don't talk about it. So a lot of people who fell into the category of having neurodivergent traits of any kind, a lot of people who could mask would mask, meaning they would hide who they really are. They would hide the things. They would learn how to some degree, do life how everyone else was doing it. But it was to a point, and is to a point still, of complete and utter exhaustion and shutdown for that person. A lot of these things, obviously, no matter what your neurotype is, we do choose to, want to interact and meet the person where they're at and those kinds of things. But it's a whole different level for a neurodivergent person who doesn't feel like they can be who they are, communicate how they communicate, have differences than what is the norm out there. And I use that norm, quote, people can't see my fingers, but it's really the typical. We want to remove that language. It's all normal. It's all okay. But there is a typical, there is a majority of society that does things a certain way. And the other part of society may do things a different way. And I say that very generally because every person is unique, right? Every person. We can never assume that a neurotypical person is the same as a neurotypical person, or a neurodivergent person is the same as the neurodivergent person beside them. Like everybody's unique. And so we have to meet people where they're at, and never come to somebody thinking that they need healing for their neurodivergent trait. That's completely off on a different tangent than what you just asked me. How do I respond to that? I think that we are living in a time in society where we have the ability now to fight for justice where there's been injustice. We're living in a time where I believe God wants change. One of the things that he placed within my heart that I briefly mentioned before, about 5 years ago, he grabbed a hold of me. I was at a fundraiser event, and there were, I would say, more than half of the people there were neurodivergent. And I was actually quite uncomfortable with what I was seeing, but we were invited, so we went. And all of a sudden, God was like, "Do you see?" And he has says these things to me before, wanting to highlight something or show me something. So, I mean, that in itself wasn't unusual. But he kept saying, "Do you see? Do you see?" And I kept looking, and I'm like, "God, if you're asking me if I see, and you keep asking me if I see, obviously I'm not seeing what you want me to see. So what do you want me to see? Like, I see, but obviously I'm not seeing."
I believe, but help me in my unbelief, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And he starts highlighting people. He starts highlighting traumas. He starts highlighting societal injustice. He starts highlighting the hardships that people have gone through. And he started highlighting those that had been so squashed down in who they are that they didn't even know who they were anymore. And he says, "Do you see? An injustice has been done to my people. Do you see? An injustice has been done to my people." And so that would be my answer to the people who say, "Why is this important?" Because God is saying, "Do you see? An injustice has been done to my people." And so if this is on God's heart, and this is what he's seeing, it needs to be on our heart. It needs to be what we're seeing. It needs to be what's important to us. So that would be my answer.
As you were sharing that story, and thank you so much, Kelly, for sharing that, I was reflecting on perhaps what we're in our current day today. We're talking more about neurodiversities that hasn't been spoken of in generations past. But I'm thinking it's not so much a new fad of today. Maybe we have language different. Language evolves and science evolves, and we understand things more with research. But maybe it's not something new on the market so much as when I look back at Jesus's time, Jesus in the synagogue, he went out and listened to the people. He was with people, and he wasn't asking people to conform to the synagogue. In fact, he was bringing church to the streets, to around the table and in everyday situations, fitting in and working with people from all kinds of diversities and not othering people or asking for conformity to a religious structure. And perhaps we're not that different. Even in our more contemporary churches, there's structures and things in place that if you do not fit in there, you really can't walk in. And maybe Jesus is using you and other people that have this passion to break the mold a little bit and help us to create spaces for everybody. And I think that's beautiful, the work. And I'm so grateful that God has put that on your heart. We need so much more of that in our society. I know my family and my community would be enriched if we had an inclusive church community, if we had an inclusive society that they could just simply be who God created them to be. So thank you for sharing that. And I know other generations, we hear stories of people that even if they were left-handed, they were like struck down with a stick in school. If they thought about things, they might be brilliant kids, but if they thought about it in a neurodiverse way, they were wearing dunce caps and sitting in the corner and said, "You are stupid." And these things that were ingrained in them. And I feel like now we need a reversal and a correction and an alignment into who God has created us to be. And where would you like things to go forward as you have researched these things, as you were pastoring in a church, as you were coaching? What would be your hope and dream moving forward for us as a society to engage in?
Like I said, I think it begins with listening to the stories, and every story that came in is so important. And there are so many stories out there. Like you say, you have so many of your own. And I think that's the starting point. And so what you guys are doing with your podcast is making a difference. People are sharing their stories. And I think as people share their stories, people start to understand that neurodivergent people are human beings. They start to hear the pain and the traumas, and they start to listen to what is needed for the change. And so I think that's the beginning point. Obviously, for churches to be willing to receive training in it, I think is important. Partly why I'm creating this training program, which I've actually put the pre-order on pause just because there were so many people from different walks of life that were interested in it that I'm revamping it a bit to actually have more than one track or more than one edition so that I can reach different groupings of people. I also want to share the stories that have come in through books and through, different things like that too, articles, because I think it's important however we can get that out there. So I really appreciate you having me on here so that we can continue the conversation, because that's what it's about. And again, as I said before, this is just innate within me to see each person individually when I minister to them or as I see them one-to-one with coaching or consulting. But I think we need to do that regardless of the person that's sitting in front of us, regardless of whether they're neurotypical or neurodivergent. So, for example, if somebody's coming to me for prayer ministry, they or to pray for them or for guidance, spiritual guidance, those kinds of things, I'll never approach them as though they need healing as a neurodivergent person or as a neurotypical person. It'd be kind of just as bizarre, right? And I think that's one of the changes in our mindsets that need to take place, is that we're not approaching that person like they're need a cure, they're at fault, or any of those things. And I'll be honest with you, so often when I'm seeking the Lord to pray for someone, He has said, "Don't touch that. I put that there and I like it." But there's other things that He'll lead me to pray for healing that's around those things. And oftentimes it's because of the traumas they've carried from society, or because it's, their own inner beliefs because of the things that have come towards them. I mean, if we look at even the diagnostic criteria, it's all negative, right? It's all, if you hit all these negative things, they're all, and so that person has that in them and they think, well, all of this is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be able to approach someone in looking at these things and shifting them to into a positive light.
Mm-hmm.
Not assuming that person wants to be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
Some people do. Some people are really happy with who they are, but they recognize that there's things within that's going on that need healing, like the things that I mentioned. But let's say, for example, someone's dealing with seizures. They might be a neurodivergent person, love how their brain works, love how creative they are, but they will also recognize that, I don't think God wants me to have these seizures. Let's dig in for prayer for these seizures.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to really be listening to what the person wants, what they need, what God's saying to us, and never assume.
Well, this has been so good to have this conversation with you, Kelly. But before we end off, I'd love for you to share a bit of advice that, from your perspective, for neurodivergent individuals who may be struggling to find their place in their church or in their society. What is some advice that you would give them as they're navigating life?
That's a great question. And I think that probably my answer will be across the board for all neurotypes. But it's specific in a lot of ways, and I think neurodivergent people will understand. But I would say to people who are coming into the church trying to connect, or who maybe have been hurt by the church, to keep your focus on God, to His character, your relationship with Him, because humanity will fail us,
Mm-hmm.
but He is faithful always. And forgive quickly. Don't let yourself be abused, but forgive quickly, right? Also, seek God where you're to be connected, and be gracious to yourself, and know that your style of worship and connection is just as important and valued by God as the person beside you. Also, because a lot of the questionnaires, people would say that they felt they were exploited, or the gifts were exploited, or that their volunteer service was overused, or those kinds of things. I would say engage where you feel comfortable. And be okay setting boundaries. You know your needs and you know where to put your energy. Be confident in that.
That's so good. Are there some resources that you recommend to churches and leaders in the churches who are wanting to create more inclusivity for everyone, that are navigating this? We don't have it perfect. No one will. But are there some resources that you would recommend that we explore?
Well, in the church, like I said earlier, there is not a lot of resources, which is one of the reasons why I'm creating Neurodiversity in Churches Response Certificate Training Program. And I honestly think, I might be a bit biased, but I think it's going to be a phenomenal program for churches to grab a hold of. Also, I'm opening up more space for church consulting. So if there are churches out there who want to navigate a little bit more in depth or one-to-one with me, just how their churches are laid out and what they could maybe do to be more inclusive to all neurotypes, they're welcome to contact me.
Wow, that's wonderful. Then I need to ask you, what is your contact information? What's the best way for listeners to follow you and to engage with the resources that you have to offer?
Yeah, my website's great. There's a lot of information on there, and you can message me through there, or they can email me at info@kellyfriesen.ca. My website is kellyfriesen.ca, and that's also my handle on Facebook and Instagram. So it's easy to find me. Subscribing to my email list is probably really great too. I don't actually send out a lot of emails, but when I do, they are, updates. So that's really great too. It's a good way to make sure they don't miss that. Just contact me if you need anything as far as consulting goes, personal consulting or coaching, or if the churches are looking for something, they can contact me too.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly, for coming on with us.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
So all those links will be found in the show notes to our listeners. I encourage you to go check out our website, and you can check out careimpact.ca/podcast or journeywithcare.ca/podcast to find our podcast as well, and Journey with Prayer as well. So we got another great episode coming next week. So make sure you're sharing with others. These conversations are important. Thank you for joining another conversation on Journey with Care, where we inspire curious Canadians on their path of faith and living life with purpose in community. Journey with Care is an initiative of Care Impact, a Canadian charity dedicated to connecting and equipping the whole church to journey well in community. You can visit their website at careimpact.ca or visit journeywithcare.ca to get more information on weekly episodes, Journey with Prayer, and details about our upcoming events and meetups. You can also leave us a message, share your thoughts, and connect with like-minded individuals who are on their own journeys of faith and purpose. Thank you for sharing this podcast and helping these stories reach the community. Together we can explore ways to journey in a good way. And always remember to stay curious.